Hello and welcome to the UKEdPodcast from UKEdChat. I'm Colin and I'd like to welcome to this 5th edition, and coming up in this episode...
But I think one of the mistakes that maybe we make sometimes in education is that we think that that can only count if it's in the context of the sort of wider world, where somebody's come up with an amazing new invention, or you've been creative and you've written a book or whatever, those kind of aspects.
Fostering creativity in the classroom is more important now than ever before.
But first, we'll have a look at some news and research stories that have been published on UKEdChat website recently. Firstly, schools better their mental health through intervention programmes delivered at school, suggests a new study carried out in East London and led by an academic at Queen Mary University in London. The study investigated whether a new psychological programme, which was integrated into the school curriculum, could promote resilience, preventing depression in 11 and 12-year-old girls. The study found that children who received the new programme called Spark increased significantly in their self-reported resilience, and their depression symptoms decreased right after the programme. Also, there is no evidence suggesting enrichment activities run to interest pupils in science, technology, engineering and maths results in significantly higher numbers of teenagers studying these subjects at A-level. Research shows there is nothing to show offering trips to laboratories or special practical lessons alone help increase participation in science, technology or mathematical qualifications after 16. The new study shows that despite these activities being embraced by individual schools and the government and being enjoyable and providing opportunities, they have not had a direct impact on the numbers choosing to study AS or A-levels in these subjects. And finally, for now, children learn how to make friends and interact with others in the first few years of school, but unfortunately rejection is part of the daily life in a classroom, and we can all remember the bitter feeling of being left out by classmates. Some children suffer widespread rejection at school, and this can have a long-term effect. In an effort to reduce negative relationships, research has traditionally focused on the behaviour of disliked children, asking what did they do to warrant rejection. Blaming rejection on a child's behaviour, however, does not explain why an aggressive child might sometimes not actually be the cause, but rather the consequence of being rejected. New research, though published in the open access journal Frontiers in Psychology, approaches this subject in a different way. It asks the children doing the rejecting, the rejectors, for the reasons they disliked certain children. The study revealed the act of rejection is complex. The behaviour of the rejected child is only partly or not at all to blame. You can read more details on these stories and many more on the UKEdChat website, or downloading the free UKEdChat smartphone app available for Android and iPhone from your app store. Coming up, we're speaking to writer and educator Sue Cowley, who will be sharing her wisdom and ideas on how teachers can embrace their inner creativities to enhance teaching and learning opportunities. But first, our regular commentator Richard Rogers now argues that the need to foster creativity within education is now more important than ever before.
Fostering creativity in the classroom is more important now than ever before. In fact, Ofsted's own inspection handbook for schools states under section 133 that the spiritual development of pupils is shown by their use of imagination and creativity in their learning. As more service-based and online businesses become more numerous, the need for effective marketing, branding and sales skills in the workforce will naturally increase too. In addition, the need to solve problems in a new robotic era places increased demands on new graduates to be creative thinkers. And that's one thing robots cannot replace. Here are my top tips for bringing more creativity into your lessons. First of all, get the students to decide on the success criteria or output for each of your lessons. Once your learning objectives have been made clear to the students, for example, describe the stages of cell division, ask them to decide how they can show you what they have learned. Students are nearly always very creative with this kind of task. To assist, you can even give them the world-renowned Osborne-Parnes model, which has 6 stages. Number 1, mass finding, identify a goal or objective. Number 2, fact finding, gathering data. Number 3, problem finding, clarifying the problem. Number 4, idea finding, generating ideas. Number 5, solution finding, strengthening and evaluating ideas. And number 6, acceptance finding. Plan of action for implementing ideas. If you're doing group work with the kids, then you could assign these stages to different students in each group. And that's another point to remember actually about creativity. It tends to be fostered brilliantly in groups, especially when a technological output is required. I'll never forget when I asked my IB diploma students to create a summary of DNA replication using technology. One group produced a website, one produced a stop-motion animation of the process, one produced a Prezi, and one produced a really funny song about the process. Try using the age-old differentiation technique of heterogeneous grouping. That is, to make sure that each group contains a real mix of abilities and skill sets. Doing this, you'll find yourself rather surprised at the quality and
Actually is a teacher out in Thailand, but also an author, and writes regularly on the UKEdChat website, and has published his own book called The Quick Guide to Classroom Management, 45 Secrets That All High School Teachers Need to Know. And there's a link in the show notes. We'll be right back.
Hey teachers, classrooms are important, but sometimes you need to think outside the walls to get the best for your children. Outdoors, children learn faster, they play harder, they develop quicker, and they grow up happier and healthier. That's why thousands of teachers around the world are getting outdoors on the 18th of May for Outdoor Classroom Day. Will you dare to play and learn outdoors? Go to outdoorclassroomday.org.uk and register your class or whole school today.
Welcome back. Sue Cowley is a renowned author and teacher, and her most popular book, Getting the Buggers to Behave, was a resounding success. In her latest book, released called The Artful Educator, she argues that teachers should fight against curriculum straitjackets and become more creative in their teaching. Well, I caught up with Sue and started by asking her what her definition of creativity was and where she thinks that definition is drawn from.
I think I'm happy to go with the sort of classic definition of creativity, which is that it's something new and of value. So it's not just about the novelty, it's about something that has to have a kind of inherent value in some way. So I'm quite happy to go with that, which is kind of generally accepted as the definition. But I think one of the mistakes that maybe we make sometimes in education is that we think that that can only the sort of wider world where somebody's come up with an amazing new invention, or you've been creative and you've written a book or whatever, those kind of aspects. But I think actually when you're talking about creativity in schools, the of value bit can be about the individual child. It doesn't have to be of value in the wider sense. So when you think about creativity, the things that it gives that are of value are things like the idea that I can express myself, I can have a voice, I can have an opinion about something, I can think up new things and put things together in new ways that people haven't before. And I think the other thing that creativity really, really does powerfully for young people is it gives them confidence. It allows them to sort of feel that they have something of value to say, even if it's not something that's going to be world shattering or life changing. For them, it can count in a really big. even if it's not something that's going to be world shattering or life changing, for them it can count in a really big way. And in terms of where that definition comes from, all my life I've been involved in creative pursuits. When I was young, I trained as a professional dancer, and as part of that I did choreography. And so I think that was kind of the starting point for me of this idea that my ideas could have power for me as a form of self-expression. So I think that's probably where it all started from. And then once you start writing, obviously you're sort of involved in a creative endeavour as your professional job, really.
So how important do you think creativity is within education then? And the biggest challenge is surely is the straitjackets that politicians seem to put around the profession.
I think it's hugely important, and actually I think it's not just hugely important with thousands of teachers every year. And one of the things that I really notice as a kind of thing that happens with every teacher I work with is they have a creative, almost a creative personality, because in their everyday jobs they are dealing with situations that will be very unexpected. So you can't kind of map out what's going to happen during a classic teaching day. You know, a child will react differently to something, and you have to be creative enough to kind of respond innovatively to that. So it's not just about curriculum. I think it's also about a kind of mindset that teachers have. And I think that one of the big fears for me about the current straitjacket, as you put it, is that it will cause teachers to say, I just don't want to do this anymore if it's going to be like this. So you'll end up losing some of that kind of fresh, innovative, experimental approach that has always been the sort of defining feature for me of what teachers do.
So from your experiences of working with teachers, have you seen a shift in how creativity is dealt with in schools over the recent years?
I think from what teachers say to me, some of the more creative subjects have really taken a pounding. I mean, if you look at primary, what you're up against is the whole pressure of the accountability regime. So, you know, a lot of schools are sort of feeling that they have to some extent, focus on the core subjects more than. And also, I mean, it's a financial thing as much as anything. You know, if you don't have the money to finance things, and I think schools do amazingly well to kind of overcome these straitjackets, but I think they definitely are there. In secondary, I mean, if you look at the crash in the numbers of children studying for GCSEs in creative subjects, I think we will live to regret that. We will look at it, and there already people are saying, well, you can only go into the creative arts if you just don't have access. And I think we will come to regret that, because our economy, you know, at the basis of it, our economy is based on the kind of natural creativity of the UK. We're a very creative nation. You know, historically, we've always kind of been at the forefront of things. And I think it's a massive shame when you think about teacher wellbeing, pupil mental health, all those kind of aspects, I think, are tied in together on this.
Like you said, it is sometimes up to how the teacher can think creatively, and there's no straitjacket in much. Yes, you're given a curriculum to work with, but you can think creatively around that curriculum. And we can take a lot of inspiration from early years practitioners, because they're the masters of designing creative curriculum. So how do you think it's possible to develop this through the older ranges, and especially within the secondary sector, where subjects are so distinctive?
I think one of the things that teachers can do is where you find that children are struggling to grasp a concept. So in the book, I give the example of negative numbers in maths. If you use creative thinking, you can usually come up with a way to take that abstract concept and find a concrete example. And that in itself is the creativity at the heart of teaching. How do I help children to understand this? Well, I could put this resource together with that, or I could use this form from a different subject and incorporate it into my subject. So I think it's that ability to almost like magpie ideas from various subject areas and put them into that single subject. I mean, there are still schools who are approaching the curriculum through this kind of creative curriculum idea. And I think something that's worth bearing in mind is that in teaching, if you stand still long enough, eventually the approach will come back round. I mean, I can remember when I started out in teaching, it was very much creative curriculum, topic based, very much experimental, and we've moved away from that. But I think you will find, well, we've been back round to that, and we've moved away from it again in the time I've been teaching. But I think it will come back round. We will realise the power of what we've lost in this respect.
I suppose it's a case of teachers feeling as though they've got permission, and you do refer to your new book, The Artful Educator, and you're kind of encouraging teachers to find that inner creativity once again. And can you give us a few examples from the book?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I talk about, I mean, I give a lot of examples that other teachers have shared with me. So one of the things that I do in the book is I talk about teaching from the aspect of different art forms. So let's say the teacher is an artist, and then I look at examples of how you can use art to teach other subjects. Look at examples of how you can use art to teach other subjects. Or the teacher as costume designer, you know, where could you bring costume into MFL? Where could you bring costume into a lesson on Shakespeare? And I think that kind of incorporating things from one subject or discipline into another is a really good way to push yourself to think laterally. Something else I say in The Artful Educator is that even at a time of constraints, small acts of rebellion are still possible. Because essentially, one of the great things about being a teacher is it is you in the room with the kids. At the end of the day, although there's targets and there's performance management, at the end of the day, it's you and your kids. And you know, those small acts of rebellion that just kind of allow you to maintain your creative flow, as it were, I think are really powerful for keeping you engaged with the profession and keeping you wanting to be a teacher. And then I think the other thing about the book is that there's just loads and loads of practical strategies. There's lists of pieces of music that teachers use. There's lists of different ways to use food in the curriculum. So it's a real book of ideas, I think, like all my books are. You know, take this, go into the classroom tomorrow, give it a try. If it doesn't work, try something else.
When you think back to actually your own classroom practice, was there any creative topic or aspect of teaching that really stands out, that really made you enjoy teaching creatively?
I think one of the ones that I love the most, and which I still use to this day, and I use it with teachers, and I tell teachers about it, and they take it away, and years later they get in touch with me and they say, I'm still using that idea, is the idea of setting up a crime scene in your classroom. So I've got hold of some actual official police tape, which amazingly you can. So a crime has just happened. I've used it in various different situations. I used it for Romeo and Juliet. So we started at the end of the story with the bodies and the poison and the dagger and so on. And then you work backwards from there. So what you're getting the children to do is observe the situation, look in detail at the information they're given, talk about, in role as police detectives, talk about what they can see, what they think it might mean. And it's a really, really powerful way to show them that, you know, texts that we might study from hundreds of years ago are about things that still happen in real life. I've used that scenario in so many different ways. I mean, I've used it to study dramatic tension in drama lessons. And basically, you plunge the kids straight into this scenario that there's been a murder, or in primary, there's been a burglary. And I had somebody get in touch with a scenario that there's been a murder, or in primary, there's been a burglary. And I had somebody get in touch with me once who'd been to a training session I did 8 years ago. And she said, oh, I've published this example online of a lesson I did using the crime scene tape you gave me 8 years ago. So I just love the way, this is what creativity does. It ripples. So you tell somebody the idea, they share the idea with somebody else. And this is the way that teachers work, which is what I think is so amazing about teachers, is that they're full of ideas, but they don't hold the ideas to themselves. They share them and they ripple outwards. And they affect, you know, thousands of children's lives for the better.
Well, this is it. And you mentioned that it just goes to illustrate perfectly how rubbish teachers are at throwing stuff away. You just can't. You think, oh, I might be able to use that one day.
Yes, sure. Or you're walking down the street and you spot something and you think, oh, oh, how can I use that?
Got a lot to learn from somebody who wrote things hundreds of years ago, which can really be used very strongly within a classroom.
Yeah, and one of the examples I use in the book, which was given to me by a teacher via Twitter, is this. It's called the whoosh technique, and it's basically a way of dramatising Shakespeare by getting the kids involved in acting both the dialogue, but also as different objects that might be on the stage. So it's a really interactive method, which I explain in the book. I mean, I think one of the reasons why Shakespeare kind of sticks with us, it's not just about our heritage. I think it's about the fact that the stories he tells still have relevance today. I mean, you can take Romeo and Juliet and you can see exact parallels to those stories. And I say in the book about the power of stories and where we can connect what we do in the classroom to the real lives of young people, classroom to the real lives of young people. I think, sometimes people look at that and they go, oh, you're just trying to make stuff relevant. That's not the point. The point is that where learning connects to the real lives of people and they can see how it really has, it has validity in their everyday lives. That's when they connect with it, which I think is a really powerful thing.
The Artful Educator, published by Crown House Publishing, is now available to buy. The link to the book is in the show notes. So over the next few days, a couple of the UKEdChat team is popping to the head offices of Show My Homework, now called Team Satchel, to host a webinar focusing on homework. In particular, the session will cover time, delivering quality, differentiating, ensuring transparency, tracking progress and setting policy. The live webinar takes place from 4 p.m. British Summer Time on Wednesday. There's drop us highlights from the webinar in next week's show. In fact, we're focusing on homework in the next episode, so if you have any ideas, tips or opinions about homework within education, drop us a line so you can be featured in the show. Well, that's about it for this episode. Remember, you can find all the links mentioned to the show notes accompanying this episode. Huge thanks to Sue Cowley and Richard Rogers for their input. You can subscribe to the UKEdChat podcast via Apple Podcasts or your favourite smartphone podcast app. And if you're listening via iTunes Store, please rate the podcast or even better, write a review. We're receiving so much positive feedback about these podcasts, so if you want to drop us a line, you can email us at podcast@UKEdChat.com, message us on Twitter via the UKEdPodcast account, and you'll also find us lurking around on Facebook. The Facebook page is at facebook.com. The Facebook page is at facebook.com/UKEdChat. You can like us and contact us there. Well, that is it from this episode. Many thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.